I am sat here today with this most beautiful English bass. I think I've almost never seen such a pure and beautiful bass. If you notice, the colour's very dark. So it's a John Lott Jr. or John Lott II. That's the son of John Frederick Lott I. These are big names that, if you're sort of into basses, you'll know. But this one's very dark in colour. You'll see, probably, hopefully in the lights it shines through, but there's this wonderful hue of like a kind of Venetian red. But then there's this very dark kind of sort of crackly layer, looks a bit like orange peel. And basically, quite often with these English basses, the varnish was a bit unstable. And I think what would have happened is a lot of them would have bought varnish from the same people. So there would have been the same varnish guy or the varnish mixer guy who either they went down his shop and got some varnish, or the varnish guy went round and sold everybody varnish. So very often with English instruments, Thomas Kennedy, for example, is another one. You find that they go this very, very dark or crackled colour. Now, I think probably what happens is that the varnish crackled, because what happens when that happens is that the varnish isn't stable, the top layer dries more quickly and bunches together, which is why you get this kind of bunch, there's little like islands of varnish, and it's kind of has that kind of orange peel effect. It's where some of the varnish bunches together, where the top layer dries. If you imagine London in like 1850 to 1900, everything was coal, it was smoke, there was candles, nothing. There wasn't like you flicked a switch, and the electric came on and there was no, thing. Now, if you imagine now, if you're at home and, someone burns something slightly in the kitchen, like, oh my God, what's that burning? And there's smoke and everything else. That is exactly what London would have been like everywhere. Everything was cold. There was fires, there was everything involved, some flame of some sort, lighting, heating, cooking, everything was done like that. So it would have been an incredibly smoky, environment, way more than we think. If you sort of, when you look at like an old film or something, or a film that depicts London at that time, it actually looks quite clean, but it really would have been a very dirty, smoggy, smoky kind of place. And I would have thought most of the time, basses would have lived out of their cases, so your bass would have been at home. And I think what happened was, the reason it went this very dark colour is actually that it picked up the smoke and smog particles, and that's kind of what made it go almost a bit black. So this didn't happen to every single bass. Sometimes it's been very carefully cleaned, to give it more of a red colour. But this is really special because it's just got, all of the original varnish. It's just ridiculous. This just, it does it for me, big time. It's very, very nice. The other thing that's really lovely about this is we've had the chance to conserve it. So when we got the bass, the front was quite sunken in, and none of the ribs fitted. It was kind of all a bit falling apart and everything. So what we've done very carefully is remodelled the ribs to fit the back and the front. And in doing so, we've actually retained all of the original edge work, which is just ridiculous. There's a couple of corners that we've replaced. But other than that, all of this is totally original, which you just never see. Something like this. It's just unbelievable. The other thing to note is if you take the plates off, obviously the plates stick on the varnish and does allow it not to oxidise. So this effect doesn't happen, or if it does happen, the smoke and smog hasn't got to it. So under here actually is a lovely red, Venetian dark, deep red. So all of these lovely basses like Kennedy, Lott, they would have all been a very deep red colour. And, there's varying hues of whichever varnish left. So, yeah, this one is just unbelievable. It's so original. I've never seen anything like it. It just blows my mind. It's incredible. And we've been really careful to conserve everything really originally and, beautifully, and like we've done a really good job of shortening the ribs to so that all fits together really well without tension, and we haven't had to change any of the edge work. It's been a very big job and time consuming, but it's an honour for us to have something like this and also to conserve it for the next 100 years or however long. So it's a cracker. So a bit about John Lott. Interesting guy. This is John Lott II, John Frederick Lott II, The father has the same name, John Frederick Lott I. John Frederick Lott I is a pioneering bass maker, a very interesting guy. He went on a real journey from his first basses to his last basses. You can really see a difference over those 30 years. They really kind of go through a progression from the start when he worked with Betts and Dodd, and then he ends up, obviously he's a very famous maker in his own time. Anyway, he had some sons, and there's George Lott, who was also a maker, and then we also find John Lott II, who was born in 1804 and died in 1870, and he was a great maker, lived a really interesting life. So when he was about 13, his mother died, his dad remarried, and I think John Lott was obviously quite a characterful guy. He couldn't get on with the new wife, so he was sent to do an apprenticeship at Richard Davies, or Davies of Coventry Street. During his time at the Davies workshop, he would have started learning his violin making, and they were making instruments for other people. They were also making a large number themselves, and they were dealing old instruments. So he would have really got to see fine old instruments and really learn his sort of craft. He then, I believe, had some extramarital activities with Davies's daughter and maybe the cook, and was kind of thrown out. And it was kind of a bit out of luck. He was making some instruments for Dodd. He was just doing bits and pieces. And in about 1830, he sets off on this incredible journey where he goes to France and is in charge of this elephant. So he goes on this amazing adventure with this elephant, and I'm laughing because it's so funny. There's a book called Jack of All Trades. Get hold of a copy. It's kind of a slightly fanciful, romantic idea of what actually happened with him. But basically, he goes on this massive journey with the elephant. The elephant keeps killing people and injuring people. I think the elephant kills a mare or something, and then the elephant sadly is put to death by cannon a bit before 1840. And I'm laughing, but it's not funny. But basically, he then it's a bit unknown exactly what happens, but about 1840 he returns to England, and he starts to sort of do a bit of violin making, and because he speaks French, obviously, when Villon comes here on buying and exchanging trips and selling trips, he's translating for him, so there's a relationship there. And then he starts making instruments, I think working a little bit with his father, because I've seen some John Lott, clearly John Lott II basses, but have real character of his father. His father loved a really sort of Steiner-style scroll, and I've seen a couple that are like very clearly a strong influence of the father in what the son does, and then you see some that maybe have a little hand of the son of the father, but the model he makes himself is quite different. There's a couple that are sort of transitional ones on the way to him finding his model, but basically he then starts making double basses in quite large numbers that are very similar and have some of the father, but also a slightly more modern, slightly more playable idea than some of the large Lotts or Kennedy basses. And I think he's making for Hart and Son. I think he may also have made some basses for Davies of Coventry Street also. And he sort of makes instruments here and there, and he's busy selling and doing all sorts of things. But basically, to discuss his model a little bit, it's a very typically English bass. There's no question about that. Gas bar is the underriding factor, deep ribs, flat back. But he picks up his father's Amati sound hole. Now, his father goes through a bit of a journey. He starts to use a Brescian sound hole, all sorts of different things. And he kind of goes on a bit of a journey. John Lott always is the same. Sometimes you see them set a little more close into the edge than this, but the sound hole idea, the Amati-style sound hole, which he gets from his father, it remains the same. The other thing he does do is there's a bigger sweep here, up, so it's actually a more playable bass. So it's a slightly smaller model. It's still a good big full-size bass, but it's a smaller model. Again, like his father, very, very slight suggestion of a purfling channel. Sometimes a little bit of a fluting down the wing of the sound hole. yeah, I mean, this is, if you're going to look at the edgework of a bass, this is the one to look at because it's all there. Deep ribs, flat back, quite fine purfling, and yeah, break sawn through and rejoined. But you can notice, if you notice compared to a Lott Senior, that's very narrow here. And the twist also at this part of the shoulder. So what he did was he twisted this part in as he bent it. So actually it kind of almost goes down at the back, whereas the father is usually pretty square. Yeah, I mean, and this, look, it's just ridiculous. I find it's one of those things where every time I look at this bass, I find something new to look at. Yeah, it's just unbelievable. And you can see this incredible golden ground that shines through. And then you really can see bits of it on the front, hues of this red. So that kind of tells you what it was like. And we've been very careful not to over-restore any of it. I think with basses, if you start getting obsessed with lining every crack up perfectly and doing all the varnish, you actually ruin its originality. It's a bass at the end of the day. They have cracks. That's what happens. Same with the ribs. We've just been careful to not over-restore the sides as well. The last thing to look at is the head. Again, they're very, very similar, all of them. Have a very big sweep here. Quite often it's a closed teardrop here. That's more for heart. I think this also has a little heart stamp. So this is probably one of the ones he made for heart. But I mean, they're Lott basses essentially, whether they're made for heart or not. Quite a delicate scroll and a sort of small throat. But yeah, this is an absolutely stunning example. I've enjoyed sharing it with you. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that.